everybody. As is protocol, I'd like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we are on today, and that is the Jarawar and the Gayabal people. And I'd like to pay respect to their elders past, present, emerging. I'd also like to pay respects to my beautiful colleagues and speakers here today, and pay respect to their elders as well, and anybody else in the room who is Indigenous, welcome. Today we want to create a really safe space where people feel comfortable to ask questions, but we're really here today to hear the stories of my three speakers here, and I'm here to facilitate, but I can't help myself, so I'm sure I'll be throwing my 2 cents worth in as well. So I was a little bit nervous about doing this today until yesterday afternoon. I was asked to do an interview with Fran Kelly on Radio National, and I went from being a little bit nervous about this to absolutely terrified about that. So this is like, pretty calm for me off the back of that. So just a little bit about myself. I am the Director of Indigenous Health at the University of Queensland. I am an Aboriginal woman, and my mob are Cooma, so the same as Uncle Herb here. And we are Lations, related, and also I am Gamilaroi on my grandfather's side, and my father is a white fella, so I'm a bit of a hybrid. So we have in the room with us today Stan Dryden, and he's a very passionate man. I've only just met him for about 5 minutes, and poor fella was running late because plane came in. Was it late?
A bit late, yeah.
Little bit late.
Yeah, about half an hour, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, but got here in time. He's not looking too rattled. So, but Stan is a storyteller. He's a cultural man, and he does a lot of work with youth and puts that energy into working with youth, particularly around mental health, healing, identity, building knowledge. So, and I'll ask Stan to speak to you guys shortly about that in more detail. And we've also got the beautiful Kelsey here, and Kelsey is a published author. So grade 12 at Concordia, and she is a Kukuyalanji woman, and I know I said that wrong. Correct me, what is it?
Kukuyalanji.
Oh, I did get it right. Yeah. All right, so you go, Kukuyalanji woman, and it's beautiful to see young, up-and-coming, strong women like Kelsey, so I'm really keen to hear what she has to say. And then we've also got Uncle Herb here, who is a published author and has contributed vastly to the literature scene in this country through poetry and through his storytelling. So we're very privileged to have these three beautiful people here today. So the topic for today is, it's not simply black or white, the complexities of mental health issues for Aboriginal people. And it isn't a black or white thing, and it shouldn't be a black or white thing, so I'll just put that out there straight up. But for us, it's very much around a holistic model of care. And that would apply to anybody, I would argue. But when one part of our mental health isn't right, then, or one part of our being isn't right, then no part of our mental health is going to be good. So as a researcher, I've done a lot of work around suicide intervention and also around the prevalence of mental illnesses in our Aboriginal communities. And these research projects came off the back of communities requesting assistance in these spaces. And we have found that overwhelmingly the rates of mental illnesses are far greater. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because when things are taken away and when your mental health isn't good, then of course we're going to have issues. So we found that in particular the rates of depression are about 4 to 5 times higher than the national average, which is really outrageous. So we need to do something about that. But what I want to do is just ask each one of our speakers to give an overview of what they do and how they're grounded in this mental health space. So I'll ask Stan first of all.
Yep. My traditional name is Yaramunya. I'm a Jar Jar Jurong man from Geelong Bacchus Marsh in that particular area. And I also want to pay my respects to the traditional people of this land, the elders past and present, and to you guys for coming here, listening to our stories. So that I believe by us doing stuff like this, we we can go back into our families and talk more about the oldest living culture in the world in your country. And that's what it's about for me. That's why I've written a book as well called A Man Called Yarra. It's a biography of my life, what happened, what it was like, and where I am today. And I got asked to come up here to do this, and you know, wherever I get asked to do things like this, that's my responsibility. I want to come up and do this sort of stuff. So that's why I got the opportunity 25 years ago when I was 28 years old. I was brought to my knees. I had a problem with alcohol, and at the age of 28, I stopped. So it's been 25 years now. But before that, I was involved with a lot of different people that wasn't doing that well. You know, I had an alcoholic father who was a white guy. He worked for Soul Brothers Circus. He was a tent boxer and a lion tamer. I'd be in the pubs, you know, I'd be in Fitzroy, the Champion, the Builders, up in Redfern. I'd be over in Musgrave Park in Brisbane. You know, my dad telling me stories about bats and stuff like that. We were sleeping out in this park and over in Whitmore Square there. And I seen a lot of stuff like that, just to give you a bit of background, a bit of a scene for you to understand where I come from. And then when I was 16, I was back in Shepparton, and you know, I wanted to be, you know, just like my uncles and aunties, you know, some of them really good fighters and stuff like that, so I got into that sort of stuff as well. So I got asked to leave Shepparton when I was about 19 by the police, because I wasn't doing the right thing there, and I was blaming everybody else up there. I brought myself to Melbourne, and I realised it was me that had the problem, until I met a couple of elders, really strong men and women. One was a really strong Greek man. He was a beautiful man by the name of Jackie Chris. He was a tent boxer as well, like my father. So I took note to this guy. I believed in what he was trying to suggest for me to do the right thing. You gotta stop feeling sorry for yourself and start doing something for somebody else. And I knew with my culture and stuff like that, that's what our culture is about. It's about sharing our culture, our stories, and our wisdom, to hand it down to the younger people so they've got direction. I've had opportunities to work in jails and stuff like that with young men where they're a bit lost and they choose to pick up alcohol, you know, drugs and alcohol. And it seems to be a big ice epidemic that's sort of happening around country towns like Shepparton and Bendigo and places like that. I don't know what it's like up here, but down there it's very full on. And I explained to those young guys, it's not your culture, the alcohol, the drugs and alcohol. Aboriginal men walked around, you know, only 230 years ago, walking through here with spears and boomerangs and being an example to our young children and showing them how to do the next right thing and to be reliable and you know, be there for your family and stuff like that. We're losing all that stuff. We need to get back to the basics. So by being what I'm doing through writing the book and, you know, playing music and my art, and I've got a gallery in Melbourne, and I'm an example. I'm there telling stories about the art, about my art, both my art and my culture, to people that are coming in. And it's an Aboriginal man telling stories about Aboriginal art, and I'm connecting with people all over the world. And I used to have a really low self-esteem from certain people that I hung out with, you know, working at different places, and you know, be saying, "Oh, your mob just, you know, they live in my mate's place and burn a hole in the middle of the floor," and you know, that sort of talk. If you get told that sort of stuff long enough, you start believing it. But I went past that part and just kept growing. You know, put the bottle down, picked up a paintbrush, and I was in New York doing an exhibition in New York. And I'm on stage with Stevie Wonder playing the didgeridoo, and he's singing Superstitious beside me, hanging out with Bono and all those sort of guys. It's what my culture gives me. It's an example of what I need to be doing to keep pushing that culture out there. And that's why I love coming to places like this and talking something that we might say up here that, you know, you can take it into your family just to keep this thing going, because it's, I don't know, I'm so proud to be an Aboriginal man and be up here to be able to talk about things to do with our culture. And like I said, my father's white, so I don't see people as black and white. It's a very boring topic to say Australian people, black and whites. We're Australians, we're here together. Let's look after the culture, look after the land, respect the water, respect the stories, and respect the culture and the people. You know, that's what I think. If we can keep it basically that simple, and because I got told that we're all just another grain of sand on the beach, nobody's that special. Wherever we come from and wherever we're going, we're all going to go in that direction, whatever that is. So I'd like to, just acknowledge that, and that's just a little bit of a story, and yeah, yep. Is that what you were?
Absolutely, that's perfect. There's no rules.
Oh, that's it, yeah. So that's
No rules at all. I want to come back to you actually about role models and what that turning point was, but I'll just hear from our other speakers. But thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Kelsey.
I come from a good home. My mum and dad work. It's good. I'm like probably like one of the in the Indigenous kids. Most Indigenous kids are they have broken homes, and I've come from a good home where we're still together, and so I think that's what most young Indigenous people that's what hurts them and makes these issues come up with them, is the broken homes and no support with from the family, and yeah.
Okay, thank you. Did you just want to mention your book a little bit? What inspired you to write that?
So we wrote a book, me and a couple of my other peers at school, and it's about being two-way strong of young Indigenous students going to boarding school and having that support through school and completing school and not turning to drugs or alcohol. And so the book it explains how the struggles and the challenges that young Indigenous people have when they're away from home and at boarding school, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, and just on that, there's always this conversation about alcohol, and it comes up time and time again. But one point I want to make right now is that we don't drink for fun, so we drink to self-medicate for underlying issues. And so there's a really strong vein that runs through a lot of communities. And there's this assumption, oh, everybody's an alcoholic, and all these stereotypes that go with that. But if you could just keep in the back of your mind that through a lot of studies, research, all that type of stuff that goes on, we have identified that it is self-medicating because people are unhappy. And so it's not something that we choose to do because we really want to. It's to assist us to deal with a lot of this trauma that comes with, unfortunately, being an Aboriginal person. But, we need this strong leadership to shift this deficit model that we're operating from and turning it into a positive model. So, okay, and speaking of a positive role model, Uncle Herb over here, the legend, would you like to give us an overview of what you do and your story?
Oh, well, this is all about, health and that in Aboriginal issues, which is always. I was born reared out in the bush in Cunnamulla, and when Mum and Dad settled in Cunnamulla, Aboriginals weren't allowed to live in the town. So they were the first ones to build a humpy just outside the town on a block of land that now we were later, my sister and I put in a claim for it, and now not even the federal or state government can take that block of land off us. And any Aboriginal can go and build a house there, and they'll never have to pay rates to any government or any federal or state government. So that was one little thing. But health issues were always, as they say, a little bit wamba, they called it in our land, yeah, a little bit silly or something like that. It was always, it was suicide, I don't think was ever an issue. It was because they were taught about Aboriginal law, and that was different from maybe European law where you live by a Bill of Rights. Ours was a Bill of Responsibility. You were responsible for any action you took, and if you done wrong, you were punished accordingly, and you accepted that. And there was, of course, there were no jails. There were never any jails in her Aboriginal history, but you still got punished and things. There was even the death penalty, yeah. So, but So, you know, health issues, I couldn't understand. I can't remember any suicides or things like that in that old camp, and yet there was there was a lot of, there might have been 60 or 80 people, 100 people living in that old camp, and a lot of them got sent to missions. They were the ones maybe who had big problems because they were deprived of their learning about their homeland and their heritage. They were taught about religion, not about Aboriginal law and history. That was one of the, I always thought was one of the bad things in history, those people being sent to missions. And as I said, where we lived, there were actually 9 boys, and I got 8 brothers and 2 sisters, so there was a mob of us. 5 of us had to sleep in one bed, I remember, when we were going to school. So, but we never felt deprived of anything, because we knew it was very, very important knowing who we were, what tribe we come from, and where our land was. That was the most important thing that helped us a lot, you know, to overcome disadvantages of being, you know, discriminated against and everything, because we knew who we were. Like today, you hear these people. Ever since I come down to Toombs, they've been on the news about these immigrants coming to Australia. Well, I reckon we should be welcoming them, because we're definitely getting a better class of boat people than we got 200 years ago. They don't shoot you and take your land. This is true. I'd like to see more of them out in the outback. And they even pay for the land. As a matter of fact, when I'm down here now, according to the things, I'm trying to get a lawyer, because we've got native title rights to all the Cooma land, which is a huge area, runs for 200 or 300 kilometres in directions, and I'm trying to see if I can put in a claim for some back rent. we shouldn't be the poorest people in the world, we should be the richest ones. So these, and they help you overcome by arguing, by raising questions and things, and they help you overcome these issues that cause, you know, mental health issues. And I think the main thing is, in Aboriginal, especially the young people, they don't know where their homeland or what their tribal ties are, which is the real, true identity. It will do a lot to fix a lot of places, fixes a lot of things. As far as I'm concerned, yeah. But it is an issue, and not only an Aboriginal issue. And what helped a lot with Aboriginal issues is why I don't think there was all this issues of, you know, people being a bit womber and silly, how they married and all that. It was the marriage laws that forbid you who you could marry and who you couldn't marry, and things like that. And, yeah, like I believe only a couple hundred years ago, over in England, the royals were experimenting with breeding a superior race just with royals, and they were realised they were breeding idiots by inbreeding them. And that was something Aboriginal issues solved thousands of years ago. So, yeah, so if you tell the true history as a story of Australia and issues like that, you've got to raise them issues too. But it is an issue, and I think one thing is I don't think there should be jails for young people. There'd be punishment. You know, minor offenders and things like that. But there should be, as I said, there should be the death penalty for those who really deserve it. But yeah, so mentally, I probably, I don't know how many times people have called me a silly old bastard. But as I say, yeah. But it's an issue well, who's to say we're not all a little bit womba? Now, but I went to a brain spare. While I'm down here, I had to pick up some things, and I went to see a head surgeon, and I was writing my will out when I'm down here too. And they said, now, well, you got this certificate to say you're not saying. You are saying. You're not insane. When you're writing your will. I had to get that done the other day. Yeah, so.
Well, that's great to hear. I think the point you make about, mental illness wasn't really in existence is a really true fact. And I see in my own family, my mother has schizophrenia, and she has been a long-term, she's been punished basically for having that mental illness. And she was diagnosed when I was 7, and she has been on really, really heavy medication for many, many, many years. She's now 68 years old, and she's, not end-stage dementia, but things are not good. But it's because of the medication as well. But within our communities, this whole idea that mental illness is new and it's only getting worse. So if you look at the rates year by year by year, the trajectory is going upwards. It's not going backwards. My mother will argue till the cows come home that if she had been born 200 years ago and because she can see things, and she has what I would call a really strong spiritual connection. Call it schizophrenia, call it whatever, but she would have been valued within her tribal group if it was not in today's society. So today it's a punishment model. 100 years ago it wouldn't have been a punishment model, and I think that's an interesting way to look at things, because our culture was very much about caring and looking after everybody, and nobody was left behind. So our society was very different to mainstream society, and it was collective, so we did care for each other. But I wanted to come back to that notion of role models, because in the research that I've done over the last 15 years, I did my PhD around retention rates of Aboriginal students who went to university. And what I found in that is that the kids that got into uni and stayed in uni either went to a boarding school or they had really, really strong role models. And you mentioned with your family that they're still together. And Stan, you mentioned those men that did, and women that sort of put an intervention on you in the nicest possible way back in the day. And Uncle Herbie with your elders. So I just want to speak a little bit more to that and the impact that you think role models have on where you are today.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, I had role models like that, but I had other role models at the start growing up, like my father, who was, like I said, he was a temp box and all that sort of stuff. And then role models I had with men then was like in pubs. So then I wanted to be just like them. So I was doing what they were doing. And then from there I just went into, like I said, I was brought to my knees on the 5th of August 1993, and I met this guy, Jackie Chris, this Greek guy, and I went in another direction. And then I started hanging out with more, with people like that. So then he was teaching me things like, he said, like as a boxing term, he goes, if you want to be a 3-rounder, you'll mix with 3 rounders. If you want to be a 12-rounder, you've got to mix with 12-rounders. So I started to mix with better people, and my life became better, because I wanted to be just like my uncles, the other ones that were drinking and carrying on and doing all that stuff. But that wasn't their culture. And these men were strong men, but they just got caught up with the alcohol. And that just took them down. And none of my uncles lived over 50. So they sort of all went into, with the alcohol, and followed that all the way through. But I went in another direction with Jackie Chris. But he'd teach me things like, he'd say to me things like, you're as sick as your secrets, problem shared, problem halved, get this stuff out of you, think about looking after others. Because this anxiety stuff, that's caused from thinking about the future, and the depression's thinking about the past. And he'd say to me, if you've got an eye in yes and an eye in tomorrow, you're cockeye, because you've got to stay focused right where you are right now. and think about helping somebody else. Get rid of that self-pity stuff. Go out there and go for it. You know, and that's what I've been doing ever since with my art and all that stuff. But it took a bit of confidence to start from somewhere, though. You know, I started selling a few little boomerangs here and there, and you know, I'd have to have cousins with me to sell the first boomerang or two, and then from there I started going in other directions because I had belief through my father. He'd always skied about me and say I was the best at everything. So I had strong people like that telling me stuff like that. Not the people that don't know nothing about my culture saying things like, you're useless, you're a drunk, you're lazy, you're doing this and that. That doesn't even come to my thoughts today, that sort of conversation. Because I'm too busy mixing around 12-rounders and doing things like that, and being an example and doing other things for the younger people that are around in my circle now. Even my own son had problems with drugs. Up until 3 years ago, he's had me as a father, hasn't touched it for 25 years, and he's went through it himself and done it. And then he's come out the other end when he was ready, and now he's right. Yeah, so I think it's individual people have got their own different issues that they've got to go through, and when they're ready, it'll happen for them. I think it's to do with them and their maker or whatever that is, because there was no man or woman that could take that craving out of me. It was something higher, and then that's when I got really involved with my culture, and now I know why I got sober back then, is to be doing things like this today and to travel around the world talking about my culture. And I'm very proud of it, you know. There's no shame about my culture. I mean, I've been the most intelligent people in the world. I've met beautiful people up in the Pilbara. I was up there a couple of months ago, and they talk about rocks and waterholes and trees and Milky Way and all those stories and stuff like that. And I've sat with other people, like prime ministers and stuff like that just talked a lot of stuff. But these people talk about reality. It's not an illusion. They're talking about the reality of this country and this island and how they respect it and how they look after it. And I felt like that when I come here, actually, to Toombs. I've been around the place and just getting off here. I've only been here for a couple of hours. Whatever you guys are doing here, keep doing it. It's just a really good country here. It feels really, really comfortable to be here. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I'm glad I'm here today to be talking like this. So I appreciate the opportunity that I have every day.
I'm glad you've got no heebie-jeebies.
Do it today. Eh?
I said I'm glad there's no heebie-jeebies on this land.
Oh no, it's very well. It's something's really good here. Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Kelsey, role models.
I've got too many, from home and from school. The ones from home would be my parents and my grandparents. And from school, I've got all the teachers. A few of them are here. My role models, they push me to do the best I can, and I wouldn't be in grade 12 if I didn't have them. And I wouldn't have wrote a book without them. And I think role models are like really good because like they show you the way, they lead you to like a better path other than drugs and alcohol and what young people do these days. And and role models, I think I'm a role model to my younger peers at school, with writing this book and
I'm glad you said that because you so are. So it's great that you can recognise that you're a role model in yourself too, because that shows an inner strength. So well done you.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to say any more? Or?
No.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to jump in there. I'm like, All right. And Uncle Herb, who are your role models?
Well, we were reared in that old Aboriginal camp where there was no such things as telephones or electric lights or anything like that, and then we'd sit around the campfire at night and listen to the old people telling stories, maybe about to tell you about everything in the sky or when the best time to go and track a porcupine down after the rain, and you know it was easy to. We had to get our own tucker. There were no such things as social service in there, and you'd say if you was if there was a shower of rain, that's when you'd go looking for a porcupine beneath a big sand hill, because all the ants had come up onto the sand, and that's where you'd find the things, how to get tucker, how to get a goanna and things like that. We had to, so there were many of them, I suppose, and they'd tell you about the laws, or like the big cave in the riverbank there where the Munagata lived. That's or they call it the rainbow serpent somewhere else. And how you could only take so many fish or things like that, or he could dry up the water and things like that if you misuse your resources. They talk about conservation and things like that. Aboriginal were practicing it for thousands of years. That's you wasn't allowed to take. You always had to leave some for the next person come along, and things. So there was many, and even as I say, with law and order and things like that. So you couldn't say there were many. All the old people in the camp, as well as Mum and Dad, and we were lucky too in learning about things, because they'd still take us out. Most of us anyhow were born out in the bush, and I remember even when I was about 20 years old, the Cunnamulla Hospital where the maternity ward used to be, well, about 100 yards away there was a big walkway, gauze-in walkway, and one little single room right over in the 200 yards away in the corner. That's where Aboriginal people, mothers had their babies, and they were still having them when I was about 20 years old, because I used to go there and visit me sisters and that and brothers, yeah. So role models were very, very important, and they not only... And then when I went to school, of course, I remember a teacher probably, when I was real little, she gave me a book, and that was... She's still a role model, because it taught me how to read. To take a book to take home, that was something that wasn't done in the camp. Yeah, so... things like that, and even when I became a writer, I suppose, I looked at, say, David Yanoyapon. He was the first Aboriginal to be published, they say, but the funny thing, I didn't like his writing, because it was more all about religion. And I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I come from the earth, so I'll go back to the earth when I die. So he wasn't a role model, even though he was the first one published. But I was actually the first Indigenous person offered a overseas residency. And they said, and same as when I got it was strange, you know, because I didn't have a telephone, anything. When I wrote some poems, and they're scribbled on old bits of paper, I still got them, and I brought them down here to Brisbane and showed them to someone, and they edited them into a competition for unpublished Aboriginal authors, and about 6 months, they didn't win the competition, but 6 months later the University of Queensland Press rang up the pub where all the Murees drink. That's what we call ourselves Murees out there. Anyone Aboriginal is a Murray, no matter what tribe you come from. And they rang up the thing and they said, I've got a letter, I've got a phone call here for you, will you come up and talk to her? You can use our phone to ring them. And it was the University of Queensland Press, and I said, gee, they're going to publish my poems. And they said, no, we don't want to publish your poem, but we'll give you £1,000 to write a book, a novel, advance. I said, yeah, and I get my hands on the 1,000 and I spent the bloody lot. And then I had to ask me, how the bloody hell do you write a novel? And they said, oh, it's got to have a start and an ending. So I actually wrote the first half a page and the last half a page. And that's how it started off to be. So, yeah, writing's only putting your thoughts on paper, yeah. But that's... so role models, I had many. Look, even from the earliest up and... Even now there's role models, yes. Yeah, yes. So
they're really important, hey?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Someone,
you look up to, and I think only when you think that you know everything. that's when you are. Yeah. You're learning something new every day, and as I said, I'm always with these issues of different races of people. I've always argued the point about there's only one race of people in the world, that's the human race, and we're split up into about 1 million different tribes, whether we like it or not. That's the truth. And I remember when the first down the camp, there's an old preacher came down there, and I said, "What's he doing?" I was about this high, and he was under this big old ironwood tree, and he's gathering them. I said, "What are they doing over there, Mum?" And she said, "Oh, they're talking about religion. You can go over and listen if you want to, and you can stay if you want to, and then you can come home and tell me what it's all about." And I went over and listened to him, and he started talking about, things up in heaven, and they're building a stairway. And that's when I got up and walked out. And Mum said, "What are they doing?" I said, "The silly old bastard, I reckon you're going to build a stairway up there, Mum. You can't, it'll fall down." And that's all she ever learned about religion. So I had many role models and people who inspired me to have your own opinions too, yeah. We've got to raise issues and questions to make the world a better place for everyone. As I say, there's only one race of people in the world, that's the human race, and we've got to learn to talk to each other, not about each other. Mm. Yeah.
Well said. So how are we going for time? 10 minutes. We're 10 minutes over.
Well, we'll stop.
Okay, we're just getting warmed up. Okay, well then we'll leave it there, I suppose.
Well, actually, if you would like to ask questions, I know that Charlie would like to ask a question. Please do, because this is a very powerful session, and we would love. I think you're all entranced still, and no one's rushing anywhere, are you? No, yeah, we can fix it. We can catch up the time in a minute.
All right, okay. Well, we'll have a couple of questions then. So where's Charlie? Who's Charlie?
Doesn't this finish at 11?
Yeah, I thought it was 11. 10 to 11.
Edit that. Sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking that was the quickest hour in history. So how much longer have we got then? 20 minutes. Okay. All right, so what I did want to mention is this whole notion of intergenerational trauma. So are you guys all aware of what that is? So is it a thing? Is it not a thing? We now know you can actually measure it through DNA, which is really scary, and it shows how much trauma people actually have. And I find that a really fascinating thing. So Stan, you mentioned the story about your son and how, it like through you being a great role model, he still turned to the drugs. My son, 13 years, is a full-blown ice addict and safe, happy, wonderful mother. No, just kidding, but no, it's true. But, really good upbringing. Yeah. And you go, well, what's going on? Why are these cycles of mental health issues and this self-medicating still coming through? And it's getting worse. And I'm just interested.
You've got to learn more about it at school. They're learning how to read and write and all that other stuff. Yeah. Listen to uncles like what we just heard just now. And then that can be handed through to the younger people in the schools. And not only Aboriginal elders, all elders go and tell their stories in certain schools, put some time into the younger people in school. So they've got another vision to go with, not with the vision of a mobile phone and Facebook and all this other stuff's been created. And that's only been designed to divide and conquer us anyway. It's all about greed. And nobody's really connecting with each other that way. I believe, that's what I believe. So it's more about sitting down and just learn about respecting your elders, that sort of stuff. We've lost a bit of that in our community as well. You would never, ever steal from the hand that feeds you. That's what we were brought up like that. If you did, you'd be cast out of you'd never want to be spoken to. You'd have to move. If you're in Melbourne, you'd have to move to Sydney to get away from them. That sort of stuff. But they'll rob their mothers now or their grandmothers now. That respect is gone because there's not enough probably strong people around to show them that you shouldn't be doing this sort of stuff. You got to teach them the basic stuff at school about loyalty, honour and respect, and learn about the culture like they do in New Zealand. You know, in New Zealand, they do the haka together, the black and white people, and I look at all of them, and they're so equal and they're so strong as a force together. You know, it's amazing. And now we're starting to do it as well because, you know, only 3-4 years ago I went over to Ireland with the AFL footballers, all the Indigenous team. We all went across there, and they asked me to go over, and I played the didge, and they done all that, their warrior dance in the front, you know, and that was in Ireland. And I don't know if they've done it in Australia, but yeah, we always seem to have to go out of the country and do things, and then Australia accepts it all, and then we come back and we do it here. So learn more about it in your own country, and be, like I keep saying, about be proud of this beautiful, beautiful culture, and ask questions with Aboriginal people, and encourage each other to keep growing this thing. Because if we lose the culture of this country, we're all going to be we're all going to have problems. Because there's things like droughts and ice epidemics and all this sort of stuff's happening. It's a spiritual thing that's going on here. I mean, we've had people here for thousands of years looking after the land and everything else, like I said about those people I met up there, and them sort of people are all over the country. So we need to mix with people like that, sit down around a campfire and tell some yarns. And you put something into the middle and we put something in, we all put it in together, and that's what our younger people are watching us. We're meant to be we're meant to be the elders and leading, you know, the way, and then they're the new ones coming up. Let's give them something to come towards instead of classes and cars and all that stuff, because I've done all that stuff with the cars and everything, you know. I've come from empty houses to driving Ferraris. You know, it's just does nothing. I felt more comfortable living in an empty house with my father. At least I had the love from him. It's the illusion of all this stuff that's happening around us. Let's get back to the basics and respect this beautiful young lady that's sitting here now, that's going to be a future lawyer, doctor, whatever she chooses to be. She will be now, but she's got the opportunity to be in this beautiful school that's been, that they're helping her now, and she's going to go in her direction, and she'll go into her community, be an example to her younger people, you know, all that sort of stuff, you know, I don't know, yeah.
And I think what is exciting there is a big wave of beautiful young people coming through the system, and it's just growing and growing and growing. But just your point about, identity and so forth, but I think even as a country, and this is just my opinion, but even as a country, we have a frail identity. As a country, you know, we look to the motherland, England, and we're not looking at this beautiful, you know, long withstanding history that we have here and incorporating it, like Stan's saying, so that you guys own that and we own that together. So there's still this really big divide that exists, and I really believe, like in New Zealand, they've embedded that Maori culture so strongly into the education system and into the culture that the minute you step off a plane in New Zealand, you're surrounded by it, and it's exciting. And as an Aboriginal woman living in Australia, I look at that and I go, I want that. You know, I really, really want that. But I'm going to open it up to the audience now. I think we've probably got about 10 minutes left, so we'll take a few questions.
Is that on? Yeah. I'm just wondering, I've lived and worked in a lot of very remote Indigenous communities.
It's all right, we can hear you.
You can hear me. And what I've seen so often is, in a lot of those smaller remote communities, there's never been a young person that's Indigenous that's finished high school. They haven't got great role models. How do we flip the dialogue from the positive to the negative so that young person can actually start to think, I can, instead of just assuming they can't? It's a thing that I've noticed over the years, is there it still isn't enough amazing young people like you that actually think that they could form the view that want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever it is that they want to do, or become a teacher. They don't even have the dream. How do we do that, we as a society? Because we do need role models, and there needs to be Indigenous role models, but there needs to be non-Indigenous role models, and I think it's everyone's responsibility. I'm a service provider. How do we go into communities, and how do we start to make that difference? Because it is all with the young people.
Well, what do other people in the audience think? Because in my mind, this actually isn't rocket science, okay? So what do other people think might be some solutions to those problems? Shah.
It's about making connection in community. Like, I just spent 5 days up on Palm Island getting to know the locals, going to the school
school, meeting the teachers, going to the school, meeting the teachers, the guidance officer, the service providers in the region, and having dinner with the families and going out fishing with them. And it's about building that capacity between us and community so that they feel safe giving us their children. Like, I wouldn't send my children somewhere I didn't know the people and I didn't know what you were offering them. So I work at Concordia College as the Indigenous Liaison Officer. So I work with all kids from Cape York communities. And just went along to a resilience study through CQ University up in Townsville, Cairns. And the community, it was a community meeting. And a lot of the things that the communities talked about was that they don't have these connections with boarding schools and towns where they can send their children, where they know what's going on. Like, they're sending them away, but they've never been there themselves. They don't have a personal connection. So therefore, then that's breaking down. The kids aren't finishing college and going on to university because they don't have that support. And it's all about the support from community, from the family, and then from the service providers. So it's building that connection and support.
Thank you. Anybody else like to contribute to that? Helen?
Hello everyone. My experience over the last 10 to 12 years with the Pyjama Foundation has been the role of mentors to kids in foster care. I think this young lady's had the advantage of going to boarding school, but a lot of these kids that are in foster care don't have that support happening. I've been involved with a family of Indigenous kids that with some amazing carers, six of them in one family with these carers, and to see the development of these kids through that mentoring role has been wonderful. But there is still that big issue of identity because they've been taken from their families and trying to relate to the example that the Pyjama Foundation angels are giving them all, and the carers and whatever. But when they get to their teens, there's this huge wrench of where do I fit? The identity of, they appreciate what is being done for them, but they're still missing their family and their roots. And so how to sort out this identity crisis for the teenagers in this. I've seen different issues with various kids in this family and others, and it's a huge mental health issue as well as educational issue, which we are mainly focused on in the foundation. So getting that role model, mentoring, and just the identity thing, connection with their roots, I think is so important.
Okay, so it sounds like it's really about a pipeline here, and we need role models for role models for role models for role models, and it's how do we build that capacity. But the flavour that just keeps coming up over and over again is that sense of identity, and we all have it. Everybody here should know where they come from, who their mob is, and there's something that grounds you in who you are. But for a lot of us, it's a frail identity because we can say, oh, well, I'm Kuma, I'm Gamilaroi, but I don't have language. I look like this. So I actually get challenged a lot about my identity, and people will say, well, why do you even say you're Aboriginal? You don't look it, or you're not like the other Aborigines. So there's these layers that go with this, but I think it comes back and it speaks to Stan's comments about education, because if people have that knowledge and understanding, all of us, and we can eradicate even those type of stupid comments that come out of people's mouths that are so soul-destroying, then that's going to make a massive issue to our young ones, and particularly up in those communities. Everybody's still running around with this deficit model, and your point about, these kids aren't even thinking about that. Well, you know, a lot of these kids are lucky if they get a feed of a morning, you know, so to be even addressing the really, really basic elements that are not being addressed. I mean, we are a population of about 500,000. We live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we are still getting it wrong. And to me, it's not that hard to fix this problem, but you know, it can't just be these individuals that are constantly out there flying the flag. It needs to be a systematic, full Australian approach, in my opinion. So, but we might just have some closing remarks from the group. Was there anybody else that had a burning question?
Can I just
Yes.
say, when it comes to education, I've got a loud voice anyway, I'm a teacher. You know, it's not just about the education. I'm at Geelong Grammar School, an elite boarding school.
Yep.
We've
I know where you come from.
Toombs, you know, Yallery, we've got 30 now Indigenous students, etc. I say this all the time. Yeah, we've got 30 Indigenous kids, but this is about the education of 1,600 students. If you just, and if the school doesn't change its way, if the school doesn't fly the flag, if the school doesn't do acknowledgement to country, if the school doesn't have reconciliation weeks, if the school doesn't embed it throughout the curriculum, then those 30 kids are going to get lost in that system. If those families do not visit us before they even come into the school to do exactly what you just said, you've got to learn who we are. There's 4 kids coming in year 7 next year, okay? We turn around to the family and said, bring as many as you want to the school, we'll put you up 3 days, you're going to live with us, and then you tell us whether you like us or not. And we'll tell you whether we want you or not. We need to build that relationships, and then we need to go to community as well. So when it comes to a school, it's not just let's have some kids in the school. It really is a systemic change throughout the school. And in 10 years at our school, very elite boarding school, Geelong Grammar School, you know, the first time we flew the flag, there were some people that complained. Today, if we don't fly it, people complain. It's now just part of and those kids who leave our school, non-Indigenous kids, have a greater understanding. They will change the world. They will make it a better place. It's not just left to the Indigenous kids to do. And they have done a remarkable job, those kids who come into our school, because it's a massive change. And they come from remote parts of Australia. Kununurra, Fitzroy, Lakes Entrance, Shepparton and other places as well. It's all over. So it's a really important question for schools to take on, I think. And I think it's such an fantastic effort that she's here with us today. And I'm just in awe of it, because I run the Indigenous program. I'm very, very sort of, it's been a life changer for me. And I'm an Englishman.
Actually, but you guys are so much easier to, bring across to our side. But yeah, well done, because that's exactly what it is. It's a two-way process, and it shouldn't be the burden of us to do this. It should be all of us working together.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I still take not only kids but adults even for a walk around the sandhill and around the old Aboriginal sites, and those dreaming tracks and sites are still here around Toowoomba if you want to go looking for them, because even out in that country, a lot of the graziers, when they settled that country, they destroyed all the sites, the corroboree grounds and that, because they didn't want any acknowledgement of Aboriginal people being there on their land. And this I know for a fact, that I've seen the destruction that's been caused out there. They don't acknowledge probably prior ownership, as you might call it. Yeah, but I still take people, even kids and that, around old Sandhill and tracking things down, or the old campsites, and tell them about history. Yeah, as well as so it's all real important. And as I said, those no matter if you're in the city, like even Toowoomba, they're still there, those sites. If you probably take, we got a job to find some of them out at home now. Yeah, out in the bush where there's no one living. Yeah.
Well, there's immense.
And the most important thing we've lost is all our plants and seeds and that. You know, they were very important to medicine and things like that, because they've been trampled and crushed by the hard cloven hooves of the white man's meat, because sheep and cattle and that, they all got hard cloven hooves and they step on the ground and they chip it, and it's been wasted, whereas they should only have animals like with hooves like camels, you know, they've got a flat soft hoof, they don't hurt the land. But sheep and cattle and goats and pigs, they're destroying the land. In that arid, I suppose everywhere. I've been trying to get scientists to, because before they brought these animals here, the only animals in Australia were the emus and kangaroos mainly walking, they got soft padded hooves. So yeah, so we've got to get the scientists doing something about developing a footprint for a stock, especially for that. And the outback and the pastoral land, that's 80% of Australia or more. Yeah. It's got to be used, and we've been going now for hundreds of thousands of years, but we're not going to last another 1,000 the way we're misusing our land. It's the land, and that was always the most important thing to Aboriginal people, was the caring of the land. Yeah. And what was on it, yeah. Make sure there was things coming up again next year.
There you go.
Okay.
And anyhow, it's great to be here. Yeah.
Well, that's our hour.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Yeah, I mean, if you can take one thing away with you, that is along the lines of my friend from Geelong Grammar over here, but just it is two-way, and the burden should not always be on the shoulders of Aboriginal people, you know. Don't be afraid to get in and have a go, because if you work with us, we will come to the party, we'll meet you more than halfway, you know. So, and I'm probably preaching to the converted because that's why you're here today, but get that message out there. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to our beautiful speakers.